for this average individual that is looking to, once again, lose body fat, gain muscle? We'll get into the training side of things a little bit later on. What should they be prioritizing in terms of their macronutrients?
Yeah, let's start with the big picture, and we'll get down to the details. The big picture is the best diet's the one you'll follow. And I think as mentioned earlier, the number one problem with dieting is most people who go on a diet lose weight, but most people regain the weight.
It's about 95%, right?
Well, 50% after the first year, and then it starts to climb to 70, 90% after years 2 or 3. We see in the long-term diet trials comparing placebo to semaglutide, the weight loss medications, over 2 years, that the average weight loss maintenance over a 2-year time period is a 2% weight loss in the general population. Whereas on the medications, it was anywhere from 17 to 23%, depending on which medication. So the point being, without getting distracted on the medication, is that on average, people only are able to maintain about 2% weight loss. And that's on average, understanding that individuals within that study, there's a lot of inter-individual variability. Some people gain significantly more than they lose. Others lose more weight than that. But there's a whole range, and I'm just saying on average. It's difficult to adhere to a diet long term. That's one of the biggest challenges we have. I've said in my obesity rant some 6-7 years ago, it's about changing behavior. That's a lot more difficult, than just working out or what have you. So calories are king. There's no question. And you need to maintain a calorie deficit in order to lose weight. And there's many paths to that destination. I said the best diet's the one you'll follow. If a keto diet allows you to adhere to that diet and allows you to lose weight and maintain a calorie deficit, then that's the best diet for you, the one that feels the least restrictive. If it's intermittent fasting, if it's paleo, if it's Mediterranean, if it's continuous calorie restriction, tracking your diet, your calories. I should say there's really only 3 ways to lose weight, what we call CR, DR, and TR. Calorie restriction is where you weigh and measure your food. That's one way to track your food and make sure you stay in a deficit. That's CR, calorie restriction. Dietary restriction, DR, is where you eliminate certain foods. That's your keto group, eliminate carbs. That's your vegan group. It's your carnivore group. Whatever you eliminate, paleo, everything a caveman didn't eat. If you choose to eliminate things from your diet, you're undergoing some form of dietary restriction. And that can be effective for weight loss, presuming it allows you to maintain a calorie deficit and you can adhere to it. It doesn't feel restrictive to you. You don't binge or overeat or relapse. The other one is TR, that's time restriction. That's your intermittent fasting, whether you do a 16-8 or a 24 or an alternate day fast or multiple day fastings. It all falls under that same category. Those are your 3 options. That's all there are. Every single diet that's ever been invented, including the vertical diet, falls under one of those 3 categories. The vertical diet tends to focus on continuous calorie restriction. We track calories. I ask for pictures of the meals and to use MyFitnessPal so that you can actually keep track of everything that you consume. So you pick one of those 3 paths or a combination thereof. We have the keto intermittent fast group. Remember those guys that, even notable people like Dr. Peter Attia was a big fan of both of those at one time. And he's since moved past that era and has evolved to understand that it is just calories, and however you are able to meet that requirement or restriction, it's whatever best suits you for your lifestyle and you can adhere to long term, then have at it. And I'm not going to argue one being better than the other. If we wanted to talk specifically about performance, I would make some arguments as to the deficiencies of a keto or intermittent fasting diet with respect to top performance for the 1%ers. But generally speaking, whether you eat 2 meals a day or 6 meals a day, when you control for calories and protein, there's no difference in weight loss or body composition between any of those dietary choices. And I think that's a good thing. I'm not trying to, insult anybody's diet plan. I'm trying to say that you have options, you have choices. And that way people don't feel as though if they failed on a particular diet that they thought was the best or the only way, they understand that just doesn't work for them and they can find, an alternate plan. So calories are king. And then you mentioned macros, and I talked about protein. You control for calories and protein. Protein's important. Protein does have a couple of pretty significant benefits. One I talked about earlier was the thermic effect of food. For every 100 calories of protein you consume, you net out about 70. So it's just, you get more foods with fewer calories. So, plus protein obviously supports lean tissue, which is, we're focused on fat loss, not muscle loss. And so we want to get sufficient protein to support lean tissue, which from the bulk of the research and the evidence out there seems to be about 1.6 grams of protein per pound of lean weight. So a lean 200-pound person might only need about 160 grams of protein. There's a reason why you might consume more, and that's the third benefit of protein, and that's it's very satiating. And people who are very lean, or people who are older and have anabolic resistance, or people who are trying to diet and have a hard time controlling their hunger, that's three great reasons where you might eat more protein, a gram per pound or 1.2 grams per pound. There's no evidence that protein has any adverse health effects in those higher amounts. That's from the ISSN. They've done protein overfeeding studies up to 2 and even 3 grams per pound and haven't seen any adverse. That's Dr. Jose Antonio. Hasn't seen any adverse effects for high protein intakes in terms of kidney or liver or anything like that. So you don't need it, but it may be beneficial in a calorie deficit for those reasons mentioned: lean mass retention, satiety, thermic effect of food. So once you've controlled for calories and protein, now you've got carbs and fats. And from the Diet Fits trial out of Stanford, over 600 participants tracked for a year, they found that it didn't really matter. High protein or high carb, low carb, high fat, low fat, it didn't matter. And really the best diet was the one that you could adhere to. So if you prefer more fats, then eat more fats. If you prefer more carbs, eat more carbs. It becomes the one that becomes a lifestyle that you enjoy. And I know there are people out there that try and purvey the carbohydrate insulin model. We've heard that if you raise your insulin, that you can't burn fat. It's patently false. It's been proven over and over again, as the Diet Fits trial proved. There was no difference in glycemic index as well. So the carbohydrate insulin model, which is still popular, unbelievable to me because we have so many human randomized controlled trials showing that high carb or low carb or high fat or low fat has equivalent outcomes, health outcomes, fat loss outcomes, blood sugar outcomes, that it's really, I don't know why it's still argued. And generally it's not argued amongst the domain-specific nutrition professionals, those with PhDs in nutrition. It's argued amongst chiropractors and journalists and other cardiologists who don't have any nutrition training. And they've been called out over and over again on social media. Dr. Jason Fung is an example of one who's a carbohydrate insulin model guy. Dr. Gary Taub's book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, was based on that. I think Nina Teicholz was hers. I forget the name of her book, but same thing. I think these are all carbohydrate insulin model people. More recently, I think Eddie Abu has been very popular recently, talking about you eat sugar, wake the fuck up. And as long as he's swearing and speaking with loudly and with confidence, people tend to listen to him. But the fact is the research doesn't support it. So I don't mean to belabor the point, but it doesn't matter for the general population that we're speaking to. In terms of performance, I would prefer to keep the fats a little lower and put more carbs in because you want to fuel workouts. I would also say this as an aside in terms of general health. We do have compelling evidence, multiple converging lines of evidence with epidemiology, with human randomized controlled trials, and now the genetic Mendelian randomization research showing that higher saturated fat diets will, for a significant portion of the population, increase LDL cholesterol, which is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Not the only risk factor, but an independent risk factor. And so I would recommend keeping saturated fats under 10% of total calories and getting blood tests to find out just how sensitive you are to ApoB and LDL elevations. So I can't make specific recommendations for fats and carbs to the general population. I just want to say that it's for your personal preference as long as your calories are under control and your protein's sufficient. And to eat now, we've done calories, we've done macros. The next step is going to be micronutrients, and those should be sufficiently satisfied if you get most of your food from whole food sources and have a variety of foods. It can be a lean proteins, lean red meat, chicken, fish, salmon would be preferable because of the omega-3s. Egg white blends if you're trying to control fats, but certainly eggs can be helpful. And dairy, another fantastic one. Stu Phillips, McMaster University, just put forth some good research on dairy showing it has an independent effect on BMI, on body composition, and performance. And so dairy is a good one, particularly yogurt, because it's fermented, is really good for the digestive system. Again, the Sonnenberg trials out of Stanford showed that 100% of the population of the participants in their studies who used fermented foods had an improvement in diversity and density of their microbiome. So their gut health was improved. Whereas when they did fiber, they found a third of the group had adverse results to fiber because their claim was that they probably had compromised microbiome already, and so they couldn't digest that much fiber. But fiber is still, from all the research, suggests that fiber is beneficial for digestion and for long-term health for those people who can tolerate the fibers, which, my diet talks specifically about types of fibers that might aggravate certain people, the FODMAPs. And I don't know if I should say this last or if we already talked about it first, but knowing now that the calories are king and how to break down your macronutrients and to get sufficient micronutrients from a variety of whole unprocessed foods, you're back to compliance is the science. You're back to how can I adhere to a deficit so I don't get hungry? And that takes us into a conversation about satiety, the types of foods that keep you full. We mentioned protein, we mentioned fiber. There's also a satiety index that rates foods based on people's perception of hunger after they've consumed them. And you can just Google satiety index and see that real high on that list is foods like boiled potatoes and oranges. Certainly high protein and high fiber foods are on there as well. But that's something that I try and utilize satiety. I have a kind of a satiety toolkit. I give people tips on how to stay full, how to replace hyper-palatable, ultra-processed, nutrient-dense foods with more satiating foods in your kitchen, like getting rid of the ice cream and bringing in fat-free Greek yogurt and strawberries or blueberries. Those kinds of swaps need to be there to help with compliance so that you don't end up overeating your snack foods. And keep those other things out of the house. It's not to say they can't be a small part of a balanced diet plan, but it should be onerous in order for you to obtain them. They shouldn't be right there handy. And you should have an alternative, whether it's popcorn or the Greek yogurt or some other alternative that's lower calorie, that's more satiating, that you can sit there and munch on out of habit when you're not really hungry, but you're just, passing some time in front of Netflix at night.
Yeah, and that goes back to making this a sustainable lifestyle, right? It's like, are you really going to go the rest of your life not enjoying some of those foods, but plan them out, be structured in how you do that? Maybe when you're going to have a dessert, have it as a meal out. I don't know if you're somebody that likes to use the word cheat food, right? But, if you just eliminate the things and you keep them out of the house, it's going to be a lot harder. You're not going to drive to the convenience store at 11 o'clock at night. Maybe you would, but then you got another thing you might want to address there a little bit.
Then you got to get back on the horse the next day, but at least that you're less likely to. And that's kind of all we're trying to leverage here is there's going to be anytime you're in a calorie deficit, there's going to be some hunger. We just have to try and make it manageable and have some sort of alternatives. Another thing is in terms of convenience, as you know, I talk about meal prepping a lot. And it's not to shill for my meal prep company, but I partnered with a big national company to manufacture and distribute my meals for me, the vertical diet meals that I sell as part of meal prep. Mostly because I wanted them and I wanted my clients to have access to them because it's just convenient if you have something, like you say, in the fridge that you can throw in the microwave that meets your calories and macros and micros, and it tastes good, it's convenient and it tastes good, then meal prepping is a fantastic idea, and you can do it yourself. I talk about ways to cook like the Monster Mash and to put it in a thermos. And to have a hot meal ready for you that'll stay hot for 8 hours or more if you need to leave the house in the morning, you're not going to be back till dinner. Those are difficult opportunities to end up at a Carl's Jr. as opposed to maybe you've got your own, an orange and a Monster Mash in a hot thermos that you can just stop and eat. And now you haven't, blown your calorie budget out and you're on your plan still. What I said and what I've been saying for many years is that if you're waking up at 4 a.m. to do cardio, after only 5 hours of sleep, you're stepping over $100 bills to pick up nickels. I think it's important to recognize that sleep is the foundation upon which everything else sits. If you don't get sufficient sleep, you end up burning more muscle and the body becomes stingy with the fat. You end up increasing ghrelin hormone, so you're hungrier during the day. You are not recovering from your training sessions sufficiently. You're awake more hours during the day, which just gives you more opportunity to get hungry and eat another meal. All of those things, for me, make it such that I prioritize sleep with my clients. And I find that that is something that is deficient in the vast majority of people that I work with. We're all burning the candle at both ends, trying to get ahead. And we're not even giving ourselves an opportunity to be successful. We're getting to bed at midnight and having to wake up at 5. Or if we get to bed at 11, then we're scrolling through social media. It's not actually sleep. If I can encourage folks just to, first of all, set aside a time frame under which they could potentially be successful, 7+ hours is the recommended dose, and then try and work towards what I call good sleep hygiene, avoiding the blue lights, your telephone, the TV, at least an hour before bed, sleeping in a cold, quiet, dark room, and waking up early and getting exposed to sunlight so you can set your circadian rhythms for the day and so that you're actually tired at night to go to sleep. So I'm straying off from the original question, trying to point out all the ways in which you can optimize sleep. But yes, I would much prefer people slept than do cardio. Now, the specific answer to cardio, I think cardio is great for health, for heart health. You can get cardio many ways. It doesn't have to be steady state cardio. Cardio is not that good for weight loss. I know that's hard to hear, but the fact of the matter is that we don't burn as many calories as we think during doing cardio. Your body becomes efficient at it over time. We also tend to overestimate the number of calories that we burn doing cardio. It's not terribly enjoyable. It's not something people do consistently for the long term, adhere to. So I don't try and set people up for failure by giving them 30, 40 minutes of treadmill. There's a significant barrier to entry. You got to get in your car, you got to drive to the gym, you got to do your 40 minutes of treadmill, and you got to come home. We're going to abandon that very quickly in a program that isn't consistent with our lifestyle and convenient to adhere to. Also, there's the problem with compensation. It seems like the more exercise that we do, what we call exercise activity, we get hungry and we get tired and we sit more and eat more. What we end up doing is down-regulating the activity that we do for the rest of the day. It becomes kind of a left pocket, right pocket sort of deal. So I encourage cardio. I usually promote a 10-minute walk after each meal because it has so many more benefits other than, it's something that you can fit into your day. It provides you all the cardiovascular benefit, helps with digestion and blood sugar control and all those things. And it's something that can be more adhered to better. And then your workouts, we should all be lifting weights. Those are a significant cardiovascular benefit. You're going to get your heart rate elevated for an extended period of time. I mean, if you're lifting hard enough to get a result, you're breathing hard, So and that kind of summarizes, some folks think I'm averse to cardio. I do 30 to 40 minutes of cardio a day, but I do it in 10-minute walks. So I've been able to do it consistently for 10 years, even though I travel all over the world very often. I'm always able to get my 30, 40 minutes of cardio in wherever I am, whether it's at a hotel or an airport or you name it. And I do it with those little exercise snacks. I think somebody coined that term. I just do little 10-minute walks. And then I don't actually have to do cardio, which I don't enjoy anyhow. You'd never catch me on a treadmill for 40 minutes. Just unbelievably boring. I just don't think it's terribly effective, to be honest. I'd rather invest that time into something that I got a bigger return on. Yeah, the next one's going to be diet and specifically calories. If you want to lose weight, you have to be in a calorie deficit, period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. You had mentioned fasted cardio or burning calories before you eat. And some people talk about intermittent fasting. Some people talk about the carbohydrate insulin model of weight loss. None of that is any more important than maintaining a calorie deficit, which can be done any number of ways. I have my personal preference because I try and fuel people for training so that they have an efficient training stimulus for anaerobic weightlifting. But that having been said, there's numerous paths to the same destination, and the best diet's the one you'll follow. And that can be very individualistic as to which one seems the least restrictive to you, which one's the most satiating, which one can you adhere to without succumbing to hunger and overeating, because that's the bottom line. And so I think Dr. Peter Attia summed it up best by saying there's really only 3 different ways to create a calorie deficit. It's CR, TR, and DR. It's calorie restriction, which is what many of us are familiar with. You get your app out and you track everything you eat. You weigh and measure your food and put it in little Tupperwares. You look at the labels on foods that you eat, and you try and maintain a calorie deficit that way. There's TR, time restriction. We're all familiar with the 16-8. And if you can't lose weight on a 16-8, then you got to go 18-6 or 24 or 22-2 if you're eating so much in a 2-hour window that you can't maintain a calorie deficit. But that's just time restriction. That's all it is. It's no better than continuous calorie restriction or counting calories. But it may be more preferable to some people. They may be less hungry. I can come up with a list of reasons why you shouldn't do it, and we can talk about those. But the next one is dietary restriction. I said CR, TR, and DR, caloric restriction, time restriction, and then dietary restriction. And that's these camps that eliminate certain food groups. That's your vegans, your carnivores, your keto folks. They just eliminate certain foods. If you eliminate carbs, you're probably going to end up in a calorie deficit. If you eliminate all meats or, paleo, you just eliminate everything that cavemen didn't eat. You're generally eating more whole food, which tends to be more satiating. But that's all that is. And it's no better than continuous calorie restriction. And you really shouldn't be demonizing most foods, certainly most whole foods. And so those are the three paths. And I have clients that opt for carnivore. I have clients that are keto. I have clients that are vegan. The vast majority of them utilize a calorie restriction model with omnivorous, very diverse, mostly whole food diet. Generally, I put them in at about 30% protein, 35% protein, as a percentage of total calories, which is not the greatest way to calculate it because based on people's weight, you just want to make sure they get sufficient protein, around 0.8 grams per pound of body weight or 1 gram per pound of lean weight. And then I put in about 30 or less percent of fat, and the rest are carbs. And I say the rest in quotation marks because that's based on your workload. If you're a very active individual and playing sports, then you might need a lot more carbs than someone who's more sedentary. So I base that off of the original calories that we allot for your goals, whether it's a surplus or a deficit for weight gain or weight loss. So it's kind of a real quick way to look at diets in general that doesn't offend, hopefully, too many people. And it's more inclusive. I welcome everybody under the tent who's with their specific preferences. I just want to make sure not to demonize anything or to make the claim that any path is better than the other on the whole.
I want to touch on something that you were talking about when you went through the CR, TR, and DR is you made a slight comment around maybe the time restricted, the fasting, maybe not being the best approach for people, which I'd love for you to maybe kind of, unpack that here a little bit, because I think if you go online these days, it's like you will see people screaming from the mountaintop that fasting is the most effective way to lose weight. It's there's obviously, I believe there's a lot of benefit. It's really helped me, but why specifically for, I guess, fat loss would fasting not be a good, effective approach?
I think fasting would be a great approach for weight loss. I don't think it's any better than calorie restriction or dietary restriction. And the research bears that out. It's whatever diet you can adhere to. They've had thousands of studies now on different diets, and long-term adherence, dietary adherence is pretty similar. It's pretty poor overall, to be honest, as we know. Over 50% of people gain the weight back within a year, and somewhere north of 70 to 90% people gain the weight back within 3 years. Most of these long-term studies show on average about a 2% weight loss over 3 to 5 years. That's why when medications like semaglutide come onto the scene and they show a 17 to 23% average weight loss after 3 years, it starts to raise your eyebrows. But what it pinpoints is that hunger, because that's what semaglutide does, it suppresses appetite. Hunger is the reason people fail on diets. And that's why I spend so much time talking about satiety and compliance and which diet is the least restrictive, that makes you the least hungry, because that's where you're going to end up failing. Willpower is not a good strategy. You'll lose that battle every time. The body is incredible at getting what it wants. And so you have to get in front of it. We have a kind of a toolbox of things that we can utilize to get in front of hunger, because once it hits you consciously, you're in trouble. You have to kind of subconsciously get in front of it so that you experience very little and less often hunger. And the toolbox obviously includes eating more protein, eating more fiber, drinking more water before or during meals, getting more sleep. Even the 10-minute walks, even getting 6,000 steps a day helps with some satiety benefit. Eating mostly whole foods and less ultra-processed, highly palatable foods. Those kinds of things all lend themselves well to satiety. Okay, so back to intermittent fasting. Now, I mentioned that I design diets for what I believe are people that should be exercising, particularly weightlifting. I've worked with lots and lots of athletes over the years. People are familiar with a lot of the famous athletes that I've worked with. I design diets for performance. And that's including dad bods and soccer moms. I think that performance is pretty important. I think form follows function, and that everybody should be lifting weights. And the optimal weightlifting stimulus is, anaerobic. It's to within a rep or two of failure. It's, something that you should do at least 3 days a week. I'm designing a diet that includes sufficient food. We know the International Society of Sports Nutrition recommends getting at least 3. They talk about 4 evenly spaced protein feedings a day. There's no mechanism in the body to store protein. And so once it's gone, it's gone. And your body, if it has repairs to make, it has to wait till you feed it again. I'm not saying you're going to lose 10 pounds of muscle because you missed a meal, but we're talking about optimizing performance as it relates to sports performance in the International Society of Sports Nutrition. They're recommending about 4 evenly spaced meals a day with a minimum of about 30 plus grams of protein to trigger muscle protein synthesis. So they don't even encourage snacking, let alone missing a meal. 78% of successful dieters in the weight control registry, which has tracked over 10,000 dieters for more than 6 years who have lost 60 pounds and kept it off, they eat breakfast. 78% of successful dieters. So it's not as though eating breakfast is a hack. If you're not hungry as a result of skipping breakfast, then that's fine. That's a way for you to comply with your diet and not be hungry. That's great. But now we're seeing some other research beyond the sports research and getting sufficient protein periodically throughout the day to maintain or fuel muscle. We're seeing in terms of what's called chrononutrition. And that's where eating breakfast can help with sleep at night. Now the intermittent fasting community is suggesting maybe you do eat breakfast and you skip dinner. We see that in study groups, those that eat the larger breakfast tend to eat less for lunch and dinner. They tend to have what's called reduced postprandial glycemia. They have less blood sugar elevation and duration after breakfast because they're most insulin sensitive in the morning. And it also seems to carry over to subsequent meals where your lunch there has less postprandial glycemia when you eat a sufficient breakfast, particularly a high protein breakfast. If people do want to intermittent fast, I'd suggest they skip dinner, not breakfast, because there's a whole host of benefits to waking up in the morning and eating breakfast. It's when you're hungry, your insulin sensitivity is the best, your muscles are most in need after that long fast. Cortisol is elevated, and that helps. You can help blunt that by eating breakfast. That would be my suggestion. My daughter doesn't eat breakfast, and it frustrates me to no end, but I don't force her to do it. And my son, of course, he loves to eat breakfast. And so I just make sure that she gets sufficient calories and protein throughout the rest of the day. I'm not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that it isn't just as equivalent or just as potentially beneficial for weight loss if you can maintain a calorie deficit with it. But I think all of those other reasons that I mentioned makes it less beneficial for performance, sleep, blood sugar control, a whole host of things that we have measured. And some people will weigh in and say, well, when you fast for an extended period of time, you experience autophagy. There's no evidence that a 12-hour window and a 16-hour window are any different with respect to long-term health. We just don't have any outcome trials on humans that suggest that fasting provides an additional lifespan or health span benefit, as opposed to just not eating for 12 hours between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. And autophagy is attained simply from exercise itself. And so it's not as though you need to skip meals to get those benefits. So that's really kind of, there may be a few other things I'm forgetting, but off the top of my head, that's, I'm not trying to shit on anybody's diet. I make some recommendations to the keto people as well. I think that a high saturated fat keto diet can lead to elevated LDL, which is a known causal risk factor for cardiovascular disease. So you'd want to do a high monounsaturated fat, lower saturated fat keto diet if that's what you intended to do. We know that people on a keto diet tend to lose glycogen, which is 3 parts water, which is 70% sodium. And so oftentimes they end up getting low in electrolytes. It's probably the biggest contributor to what's called the keto flu when people get tired from going keto. It might not necessarily be the carbohydrates. It's probably the hydration portion. It's probably the sodium reduction that's occurring. And so I make those recommendations with respect to keto as well. I think there's always pros and cons to, and with the continuous calorie restriction, some people just don't like weighing and measuring and tracking their food. They can create an unhealthy relationship with food that way. So there's certainly disorders to be addressed with any type of dieting. Well, as it turns out, we do have decades of scientific research on high carbohydrate diets. Now, Mark's choice of labeling it the sugar diet, of course, is Mark Bell. He's the ultimate promoter.
Great businessman and marketer. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great businessman and marketer. And then he purposely pokes people in the eye talking about gummy bears and stuff like that, when in fact he's eating salads and fruit and the like. Just like you said, you went high fruit. We have decades of research on high carbohydrate diets. The blue zones are a perfect example, although I think that that entire blue zone genre is heavily influenced by poor birth records, unfortunately. But Okinawa was at one point, I think, 85% carbs. Vegan diets generally tend to be somewhat north of 80% carbohydrates, and have shown, to be excellent for health span and lifespan. So a high carbohydrate diet's nothing new. We had some research back in I think it was I talked more. I was when I talked to Mark, I had done a little background step, but I was able to mention the names of the researchers. But I think as far back as the 1940s or 50s, we had the rice diet, which was reversing diabetes. Here's the thing, and I, on many of my podcasts and seminars, have referenced literature showing that, and this is the author's conclusion, that 90 to 99% of health benefits are realized strictly from weight loss itself, irrespective of diet. I talked about this in terms of the McDonald's diet, the 7-Eleven diet, the Twinkie diet. And of course, usually when people are stitching me on Instagram, they stop right there. On Tim Bilyeu's podcast, which had millions of views, or Tom Bilyeu, his podcast had millions of views. I had mentioned that, and it got stitched all over the place, and people were screaming and yelling that I was promoting a McDonald's diet. But my very next statement is I would never recommend a McDonald's diet for a variety of reasons: high cholesterol, low micronutrients, satiety, absence of benefits for that. But nonetheless, the fact remains that the weight loss itself is the primary driver of the health benefits. Reduced blood pressure, reduced lipids, reduced blood sugars. All of those things improve with the weight loss itself, irrespective of diet. And then, of course, there's all sorts of different restrictive diets: carnivore, vegans, restrictive. It's just any elimination diet. There's only 3 types of diet. That's, calorie restriction, time restriction, and food restriction. Dietary restriction, we call it CR, TR, and DR. And dietary restriction would be eliminating any, or drastically reducing, such as keto, down to 50 grams a day of carbs, or vegan or carnivore, and eliminating a bunch of foods. It's not uncommon. This has been going on for decades. Reducing particular macros, or eliminating paleo, just eliminating everything that a caveman didn't eat. There's no independent benefit of those diets. We've seen this with intermittent fasting. It's been argued back and forth. Autophagy, cancer reduction, all these other claims are in evidence now with at least a decade or more of very specific research comparing these diets to each other, independent of the weight loss, other than maybe keto for people suffering from what is that? And so many thoughts going on in my head right now. I'm sorry, but there's no independent benefit, no specific benefit. And if you've followed, as you have, a lot of these influence, Dr. Peter T is one who has evolved over the years. He used to be a big carbohydrate insulin model guy, a la Gary Taubes, and then he was a big keto guy, and then he was a big intermittent fasting guy. And now, all these years later, after the evidence has become painfully clear, he's like, independent of a calorie deficit, there doesn't seem to be any magical specific benefit to any of these diets. So
I wanted to start with that because I did a podcast with Mark, and I think it's funny actually, and I haven't really, you know, uh, built out this line of thought. You just asked me, but I've kind of been thinking the other day. I was just thinking to myself, it's just laughable watching all these keto and carnivore folks. And look, I'm a big red meat guy, and I'm a use the best diet that you'll follow guy. I've always suggested that the best diet is the one you'll follow, irrespective of whether it's keto, intermittent fasting, what have you. But these people who are religious about these, their Instagram name includes carnivore or keto or fasting queen or whatever it is. uh, these people are just having a meltdown over Mark's diet, claiming it's going to be unhealthy, this, that, or the other, especially the people that are into the whole low carb keto thing. There's a host of different names that you know. I won't talk about them right now, but and it's just hilarious because they even at this point now, because we have the evidence, they even made up a category of people who somehow were immune from elevated LDL and cardiovascular disease because they were otherwise healthy. That was the lean mass hyperresponder, which we had to listen to for 4 or 5 years now. We've had to listen to Feldman and Nick Norwitz and just proclaiming that there was this specific group of people who were exempted from cardiovascular disease related to LDL elevation just because they were healthy, because they had a low triglyceride and a high HDL. They completely made it up. They just completely made it up. And now they're just screaming bloody murder because Mark Bell's talking about eating carbohydrates or specifically sugar, but that's really not what it is. And all carbohydrates, whether they're fruits or added sugar, have the exact same pathway for breaking down. You can't tell them apart in the body. And then we've got these people out there like Glucose Goddess screaming about glucose spikes. There's no evidence that normal physiological response to carbohydrate consumption has adverse health effect. And we do have some evidence suggesting that the more robust insulin response to carbohydrate consumption is indicative of a healthier pancreas. So now we're not talking about insulin resistance people, people who have type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes, but that's calorie driven. That's not sugar driven. Aggravating the symptoms of an existing diabetic can certainly be changed with your carbohydrate consumption and should be. But in terms of what causes diabetes, sugar doesn't cause diabetes. Energy toxicity from any calorie and fatty liver disease is driven at twice the rate of sugar by eating saturated fats. So we have all that evidence. And just to cap off the whole lean mass hyperresponder nonsense, which has finally come to an end recently with a study that was commissioned by and conducted by those individuals who made up the whole lean mass hyperresponder farce, turned out that their soft plaque accelerated at 4 times the rate of the normal population. And then they lied about the results. They didn't even declare, they didn't even post the results for what the original, that the study was originally designated to say, and tried to tweak it. And it was a disaster, an absolute disaster. So it's just laughable to me that the keto community and the lean mass hyperresponder folks, I've joked with Mark the other day. I sent him a text. I said, you should call this the lean mass non-responder and just make it up and then go pay for a study from Harvard to look at people who have been on a low or a high sugar diet for more than 6 months to talk about how great they feel on it and claim that that's evidence, which is what the carnivore Harvard study did. They took people who had been on the carnivore diet for over 6 months and interviewed them. It was simply anecdotes from people whose Instagram had carnivore in their name. No shit, they're going to say that it was fantastic for them. The bias in this stuff, these are the same people who complain about the epidemiological research out there would then, present a study like the Harvard carnivore study. And I'm not against carnivore. I I've made recommendations that it's at being the ultimate elimination diet for people who suffer from extreme digestive distress. If you want to claim it's any better than any other diet, you have to have evidence to that. And when you want to claim that adverse biomarkers are somehow exempt from disease progression because of your diet, then you need to have evidence for that. And none of these people do have evidence for that. They don't have evidence that their diet is any better long-term for long-term dietary adherence. They don't have any evidence that it somehow usurps, adverse biomarkers, and specifically LDL, as discussed, or increased, prostate cancer exposure or colon cancer exposure from, processed meats, which I think most folks would suggest that it's, processed meats are not part of the carnivore diet. But nonetheless, I'm a big tent guy. I'm more than happy to get them all, as far as to drive weight loss. I'm more than happy to present all the options to folks and see which one they can better adhere to long term. But that doesn't mean you can disregard NAFLD, LDL. And I don't disregard with the sugar diet insulin resistance, but it's just not driven by that. It's driven by calories. And if you're in a calorie deficit and you're an otherwise healthy individual and you choose to utilize a high carb diet, which I would prefer if that was lots of fruits and vegetables over just added sugar. But we have tons of studies, even with fructose, at 200 grams a day, substituting sugar for other calories in the diet, or even substituting fructose for sucrose. We don't see any adverse effects on health outcomes in those human randomized controlled trials from substitutions. So until such time that you could provide me evidence to the contrary, either mechanistically or with biomarkers or human outcomes, I'm inclined to believe that there's absolutely nothing wrong with picking your preferred macronutrient content. The only thing I cautioned Mark about was getting sufficient protein, such as in long fasting trials, we see a loss of muscle tissue. But as we discussed earlier, that's driven more by the training stimulus than it is by protein, presuming you get, a base amount. I suggested to Mark the base amount of that was probably 1.2 grams per kilo, or about 0.6 grams per pound. I thought was kind of the bottom end to optimize. And that's, based on Stu Phillips, 1.2 to 1.6 was kind of the range he thought was more than sufficient. 0.8, not necessarily so. We do see some decrement in particularly as we age in terms of anabolic resistance or sarcopenia. But a guy Mark's age who's active and training, I just suggest that he probably didn't need more than 0.6 grams per pound, and that might even be per pound of lean weight. And he's at about 160 pounds of lean weight right now. And so, I told him I didn't think he needed more than 100 grams a day to optimize of protein, to optimize his lean mass retention while dieting, because his goal is to lose extra weight. And that's only 400 calories a day, 100 grams of protein. And sometimes he'll do a fast and not get that protein at all. He'll do like a 3-day fast, but he'll do it with just eating tons of fruit. And again, I don't think fasting imparts any specific, independent benefit than weight loss. If you want to do it, do it. Adding some fruit in there doesn't change anything for me. Whether or not it's officially fasting or not means nothing to me. There's no impact on autophagy or whatever other, buzzword of the day you want to use to try and justify fasting as having some special magical benefit. So I don't care if you eat a protein bar or if you eat a piece of fruit or, we know that calories, the lower the calories, the more weight you're going to lose. Just hold on to lean mass with a sufficient training stimulus, and then don't go too long without sufficient protein in order not to lose too much muscle. But Mark's got muscle to lose. He's more than muscular enough. So I'm not too concerned. So I know that was a bit of that was kind of disjointed, my response there, but I just, as my brain started touching on all these things that people try and claim are problems with Mark's new diet, I just don't have any evidence to, and I think that the alternatives don't present themselves as being any better.
I had somebody message me probably 6 weeks ago about the sugar fast, the sugar diet. Mark Bell. He said, "Did you see what Mark is doing?" And I followed Mark for years. I know he's a great friend of yours, but he's done all the craziest things out there. And I kind of brushed it off at first as, "Oh, that's just Mark. Like, he'll do anything that's extreme, and he's great at it." And then I started to see more about it. And then I saw a conversation with you and him on his YouTube channel. And then I went deeper into it. And then I experimented with it a week ago. And my results were phenomenal. I mean, weight loss like that, it shredded off like 7 pounds in like 2 days. And I'm already fairly lean, visible abs, like probably close to 11% right now. Very visible abs. Strength was good, but it just went like gone. Energy, incredible, like throughout the day. I ruck every day with a 70-pound vest. I knocked a minute off of my mile time rucking just with eating only fruit. Sleep through the roof. I track it on Aura. Now, my strength in the gym did slightly decrease. The workout pumps were incredible, but I noticed my ability to push as much weight dropped in just a week. So those were my results, and I'm excited. I'm going to do it again as I prep for a cruise, just as that kind of final shred. Because what I also noticed is when I reintroduced a lot of carbs and starches back in, it was almost that post-show rebound. Like I filled back up and I looked incredible. So I'm going to do another week doing the Smelly Protocol.
Way down on that list of importance, we do see things like meal timing is in there. This would primarily be for somebody competing in a sport or somebody on a lower carbohydrate diet might want to preferentially put those carbohydrates before and after training. And somebody who's competing in a sport might want to have a lower fat, higher, simpler carbohydrate, lower fiber 2 hours before a training bout. And it would depend on the duration of the training bout, whether or not you actually needed intra-workout carbohydrates. If it's a brief training bout, probably not totally necessary. Hydration then becomes the next thing after getting sufficient carbohydrates to fuel your workout, either 2 hours before or throughout your training. And I'm kind of talking about these collectively because there is a mechanism by which your body more efficiently absorbs carbs and sodium and water if the concentration is ideal. Okay, if the amount of carbohydrates, sodium, and that's in the water, that can influence how well your body absorbs those things because they work together to shuttle water and glycogen and carbohydrates into the muscles. So if you're going to hydrate for a training session, I've always recommended that we add sodium. I add sodium to most of my athletes' diets, particularly because they're generally not eating fast food or packaged food. And they have a higher sodium demand because they sweat more. Lane Johnson, the Philadelphia Eagles, I work with him, and he sweats out 5 grams of sodium an hour. It's largely genetic. Dr. Sandra Godick from the Heat Institute, a PhD in thermoregulation and hydration, she has a website called Levelen.com, Levelen, Levelen.com, and she supplies sweat testing patches. And I've had these for a number of my athletes over the years. You can buy one, they'll mail it to you. You wear it for an hour or put it on your athlete for an hour. You put it back in the package and send it to them, and they'll tell you how much salt your athlete sweats out in an hour so you can design a more specific rehydration program. And this is kind of post-training. I'll just hit on it really quick. The International Society of Sports Nutrition as well says that for every 2 pounds of weight that you lose, every kilo, every 2 pounds of weight that you lose during training, weigh in before and after, you should replace that with 1.5 liters of water and a sufficient glucose and sodium solution to replace, particularly if you're training twice a day, to replace a lot of what you sweat out and burn during training. Could be somewhere around 75 grams of carbohydrates, would be around 300 calories, which would be a kind of an expected glucose burn for, a 40, 50-minute workout, unless it's, super high volume or high intensity training, along with, and now that depends, 900 to 1,500 milligrams of sodium. And that would be based on the sweat rate of the individual. Are you a salty sweater? You might need more or less. But that's kind of the concoction. Now let's talk about pre-workout and intra-workout. The ideal concentration, Dr. Sandra talks about this, there's a great video by Simon Hill with, I want to say, Sally Sims, SIMS, PhD, hydration specialist, sports performance, sports nutrition. The best hour of hydration you'll ever listen to, she talks about Gatorade and why it might not be ideal, and how it's evolved over the years from what it used to be to what it is now. She talks about things like coconut water, all those things that people, for potassium, and why they might not be optimal. And then she gives very specific recommendations, and I'll give them to you now. She wants to see about a 1 to 2% solution of sodium and about a 3% solution of glucose. Could be dextrose, sucrose, glucose, of sugar. And that breaks down like this. Say for every gallon of water, you can make this for yourself. Take a gallon of water, put 1,000 milligrams of sodium in there. That's 1 LMNT or 2 of the liquid IVs. This LMNT has 1,000 milligrams of sodium. Liquid IV has 500 milligrams of sodium. So whatever your preference, get 1,000 milligrams of sodium. I like the LMNT in liquid IV because it's flavored. And so obviously this is going to taste, rather than just putting salt in there, because that tastes horrendous. And then put about 80 grams of sugar in there. Somewhere between 60 to 80 grams of sugar. I use dextrose. It seems to be the easiest on my stomach. There's some evidence that when you combine a 2-to-1 ratio of dextrose to fructose, that it increases the rate of absorption and decreases the negative effects potentially for digestion, because it's digested faster and it's digested through 2 different pathways: glucose into the bloodstream, fructose through the liver. So I don't want to overcomplicate it. Mix a gallon of water with 1 LMNT and 80 grams of sugar, dextrose, glucose, I don't care, sucrose, whatever you decide.
What are your thoughts on cyclic dextrin?
Yep, that could be fine too. Here's the reason why. If you have too much water, if you drink too much water, you're going to piss it out. If you take in too much sugar, you're going to piss it out. If you take in too much salt, you're going to piss it out. Your body adapts to the concentration by drawing water into the small intestine and then excreting it from the body, up to the point at which you may either throw up or get diarrhea if you get too much sodium. It's not a more is better scenario. And so you have to be concerned about, is the concentration optimal for the water, salt, and glucose to get absorbed into the bloodstream from the small intestine without causing any disruption in the balance, the homeostasis of the body? And that appears to be the most optimal concentration of water, sodium, and glucose to absorb into the bloodstream. Now, you don't want to chug it in massive amounts. Dr. Godek says drink when you're thirsty. But if you're prepping for an event or you're rehydrating for an event, she likes it to be cold and she likes it to taste good. But you want to sip that because there's only so much you can absorb per minute or per hour. And so you sip on that periodically. During training, let's say maybe 6 ounces every 15 minutes. You get a kid in a soccer game or a football game, ideally you would want to give them, about every 15 minutes, give them about 6 ounces of this concentrated glucose water. And that would be, if you were going to go to such an extreme to try and really optimize the hydration to make them feel as good as possible so that they didn't lose too much weight and have it adversely affect their performance, that would be the recommendation. Ultra endurance events that last for longer than 2 hours, that would be the concentration. And you wouldn't want to glug that every hour when you're already dehydrated. Your body was not going to be able to absorb it at quick enough rate. You want to drink it about 6 ounces every 10 to 15 minutes throughout the entire event.